Your Honor, every one of these letters is addressed to...
In Frame Out.
To celebrate a year of In Frame Out existing as a format for film analysis, discussion, and people yelling at me in the comments because I either do or don't like the wrong or right things, I thought it'd be nice to reach out to you fine individuals and take on some of your questions, queries, and hot takes. So without further ado... Julia Max Falcon asks, what was the first film you ever bought yourself on VHS or DVD? On VHS, I'm pretty sure it was this tape of The Simpsons featuring Mr. Lisa Goes to Washington and Separate Vocations, and on DVD, I bought Scary Movie, Road Trip, and The Thomas Crown Affair in a 3-for-1 deal. Side note, the Thomas Crown Affair remake is underrated. Tim Lobster asks, what's the most legitimately pretentious film opinion you've ever heard? Either horror and comedy are lesser genres as they're easier and cheaper to make financially and creatively,
Wrong!
or the less obtuse works of Lynch and Cronenberg are inherently inferior.
You're wrong, and you're a grotesquely ugly freak. Thanks.
Tails asks, what was your favourite MTV show? Without a hint of shame to my answer, I've got to say Beavis and Butthead.
There's no one to tell us what not to do.
Yeah, there's nobody to say, no, don't burn that. No, don't set that on fire. No.
Runners-up prizes go to Jackass and Celebrity Deathmatch. Johnny Toxin asks, is there any film regarded as a classic that you absolutely dislike? The 1980s remake of Scarface does nothing for me whatsoever. Aside from admittedly iconic sequences everyone remembers, I've never really warmed to it. I don't respond to any of the characters or their motivations. Tony Montana's arc starts with him committing murder over next to nothing, so it didn't feel like there was much in the way of moral latitude at any point. As far as more recent efforts are concerned, I despised the sentimental hallmark tripe of the theory of everything, for hot air huffing awards contention and one of the most undeserved leading actor Oscars I can remember. Daniel Santos asks, some films go against the idea that slow pacing is a negative. However, some are undeniably slow to their detriment. What are the key differences between those that handle slow pacing well and those that don't? I say a truly great film is either as long or as short as it needs to be. It's all about the crafted economics of storytelling and artistic intent. And I trust that what's on screen is there not due to ego or indulgence, but because it's required to deliver the artistic truth in its purest form. Personally, I think you could cut any post-Kill Bill Quentin Tarantino film by at least 30 or so minutes and lose nothing of substance, but gain back so much cohesion and purpose those films lose to bloat and masturbatory self-indulgence. However, Paul Thomas Anderson, who is often talked about in the same circles, makes longer films that derive their atmosphere and acutely human connection by having the confidence to rest and reflect. The extra time is used to cleanse the palate, give both the audience and film a moment to catch their breath, and consider what's gone before. Lynn Ramsey is the master of making relatively brief films that still maintain a sense of air and outstretched ambition while keeping to a lean runtime. To sum it up with a quote from Deep Blue Sea,
grab hold of a hot pan, a second can seem like an hour. Put your hands on a hot woman, an hour can seem like a second. It's all relative.
Tails asks, of all the shows you watched as a kid, which had the best theme song? Earthworm Jim,
Earthworm Jim, he's such a groovy guy. Earthworm Jim, he rockets through the sky.
Freakazoid,
Freakazoid.
and SWAT Cats. Because nobody talks about SWAT Cats, and this theme tune is Riff City. Chariot Rider asks, what do you think stop motion animation is uniquely capable of compared to other forms of animation? Do you have a favourite example? What do you think the future holds for the medium? I've always had a very tactile attachment to stop motion. As a child, I couldn't draw for shit, but I was always happy to craft little plasticine people in my own very stupid but still very personal way. There's an expressive quality to watching the movement of inanimate material that always astounds me, especially when you realise how painstaking the process is. My favourite examples would have to either be Wallace and Gromit's The Wrong Trousers, or the more recent and utterly beautiful My Life as a Courgette. So long as we still have studios like Aardman and Laika, who made my favourite animated feature of 2019, I don't see why it can't coexist with more traditional forms of animation. Hydrotool asks, what's the best TV show you've seen lately? Barry is the most versatile and morally intriguing dramatic comedy since Breaking Bad for me, with a central performance by Bill Hader that is at once both detestable and magnetically empathetic. Chernobyl is an exceptionally structured and presented account of a world-changing event that made me feel nauseous for about 80% of its runtime, and it also has some of the best production design I've ever seen. A few quick shoutouts to Mindhunter, Killing Eve, Fleabag, When They See Us, and whenever the new season of BoJack Horseman is out. Next up, I'm finally going to get round to watching The Americans and Mad Men. Johnny Toxin asks, which in-frame out video was the easiest to make, and which was the hardest? The easiest would probably be my look at Elephant and Gus Van Sant's Death trilogy, which is odd considering the incredibly challenging subject matter. That film is articulated so visually, pulling footage and editing around each point in my script was simply a matter of trimming and then timing the images to what I was trying to say. As for the most difficult, my Shrine to Nicolas Cage took well over a month of solid research, fact-checking, and visits to the library before I even began to write it, while the Hostel retrospective is one of the features I'm most proud of, and it took by far the longest to edit. Tails asks, what film demands to be seen on VHS? Oh, absolutely the Monster Squad. Everything about it reminds me of sitting in my friend Jamie's room and watching it on a worn out, fuzzed up tape, and thinking, wow, this is exactly what would happen if Shane Black tried to write The Goonies with monsters in it. Second place would probably go to Mars Attacks. Hot Cider asks, why can't we have another Schwarzenegger considering the absolute failure of The Rock in that regard?
I'll tell you what I think of it. I live to see you eat that contract. But I hope you leave enough room for my fist because I'm going to ram it into your stomach and break your goddamn spine! Ah!
I wouldn't say The Rock is a failure as much as he's very adept at one thing and rarely extends himself beyond that. Say what you will, Schwarzenegger had Herculean proportions that were then applied to some of the best high-concept action and science fiction hybrids of the 80s and 90s. In the 80s and 90s, there was a lot more of a singular focus on an antagonistic force or foe. Aliens, this weird vested brick shithouse of a man, a physical embodiment of techno-fear. Now, even dumb films are overly complicated by CGI, exposition overload and franchise-building guff. It's hard to hark back to the simple joys of someone kicking someone else in the nuts.
You want to be a farmer? Here's a couple of acres.
Jesus Heranadas asks, what's your take on the TV shows Pandora and Another Life? I haven't checked them out, and a lot of people I hold in a pretty high regard said they were either disappointingly shallow or hot garbage, which is a damn shame because Another Life has some Battlestar Galactica pedigree, and that's one of my favourite shows of the last 20 years. If anyone out there has seen either of them, let me know in the comments if I should give them a shot. MML Commentaries asks, how has your perspective on a show or film changed after learning that a director, writer, or actor was a piece of shit? All told, there's nothing to say you can't be an artistic genius and also an insufferable, awful prick. Chinatown is, to my mind, an essentially perfect film that happens to have been directed by subhuman garbage. Woody Allen, on the other hand, is such a singular authorial voice over each aspect of his filmography and has a real proclivity for making plot points centered around inappropriate sexual relationships between old men and very young women, which is far too close to real-life events to be ignored or tolerated for the sake of appreciation on their own merits. I understand each stance, from the outright refusal to consume media by problematic persons, all the way to accepting it takes a village to raise a family, and dozens if not hundreds of good and supremely talented persons to make a film. Tashakerer asks, which film do you feel has been the most misread? I'm always going to say Starship Troopers for this question, but as time has trundled on, I feel it's been rightfully reappraised, to the point that the consensus has finally shifted to the right side of admiration. Beyond that, I've never really understood how anyone who's actually watched Zero Dark 30 could ever think it endorses torture, beyond representing it as something that has happened. Julia Max Falcon asks, what YouTube channels would you recommend? First and foremost, the best writer on video games on Earth also happens to be one of my oldest friends, writing on games. He takes multiple intellectual and creative disciplines such as literature and musical theory and applies them to articulate, digestible videos on games and the medium as a whole. MML Commentaries tackles everything from the fundamental importance of editing and its evolution in the industry, how Monopoly works, and why Songs for the Deaf kicks an impossible amount of ass. And now, because the internet is both absolutely disgusting and a beautiful thing, here are quite a few questions about Shrek. Lamahoot asks, what is it about Shrek as opposed to any other film that gets people to make a yearly pilgrimage to Wisconsin to celebrate it? I mean, you have Lebowski Fest and the associated religion Dudism, which acts as a modern branch of Taoism, BronyCon for My Little Pony fans, to name two. But with Shrek, I think it's a matter of time and pop culture. It's released post-millennium, pre-9/11, as one of the first CGI animated features, with a sense of snark and self-awareness not present in Pixar's films up to that point, alongside the mid-20s to early 30s demographic of Shrekfest, has bubbled over into this beautiful coming of age for those raised watching it. There are multiple layers of nostalgia at play, not only for the film itself, but the pop culture riffs and accompanying soundtrack. The ubiquity of meme culture and the internet feedback loop of shitposting nostalgia until it mutates into something altogether new also probably doesn't hurt. Lamhoot also asks, could you critique Shrek's Scottish accent?
Hold the phone.
It's not realistic in any way, shape or form, but there's a clear affection for the Highland people in its articulation, and I accept it just fine, and I've never seen any other Scottish people take an issue with it.
Whoa, hold on now. Where did that come from?
And once again, Lamhoot asks, is Shrek completely tone deaf for saying don't judge a book by its cover, while simultaneously making fun of Lord Farquaad exclusively for his physical appearance? Mike Myers does this a lot in his films, and it's always pretty suspect. After decades of distinctive Bond villains and physically unconventional horror figures, appearance became something of a shorthand prodding point for antagonists. It could and probably should have been handled in a less narratively self-defeating way, but of all the hurtful things in Shrek, I'm far more cut up about how dirty they do the giant gingerbread person in Shrek 2. Hot Cider asks, why is Wreck-It Ralph better than Shrek? My god, there's a lot of spice coming off this roasting hot take. While I don't think it's better, so to speak, also Shrek 2 is definitely superior to Wreck-It Ralph 2, I think historically Wreck-It Ralph won't age nearly as horribly as the reference points in Shrek have. Ralph's pop cultural touchstones are so historically significant to the medium of video games that as far as we get from this point, they'll still be relevant to a degree. Thank you for everyone who submitted a question, and thanks for watching. This was a lot of fun. Who knows, maybe we'll do it again down the road. Special shout out to our Patreon producers Jennifer C, Claire MD, Timothy Robinson, and Paul of the Pauls. And won't you just look at these succulent human beings? If you ever want to ask a question or just reach out, get us in the comments or on any of our various social media platforms. If you'd like a more direct line of communication, as well as additional reviews, your name in the credits, and access to the In Frame Out Film Club, consider supporting us on Patreon at the link in the description below. Until next time, this is In Frame Out.